Hello, welcome to my talk about weeds and weed management in hemp. My name is Lynn Sosnoskie and I'm an assistant professor of weed biology, ecology, and management and specialty crops here at Cornell University. Weeds in any cropping system compete with the crop for water, nutrients, and light, and that can directly impact yield, quantity, and quality. Weeds that become established in crops can alter the microclimates around the plants, which can then impact disease development. And weeds can actually serve as alternate hosts for both pests and pathogens in our cropping systems. Vegetation that isn't controlled can reduce the final harvestability of the crop. And the absence of any kind of vegetation control chemicals in the hemp crop itself may necessitate the use of multiple and integrated practices to suppress weeds that become established. With respect to integrated weed management in hemp, the first step should always be proper site selection, and that means avoiding fields with perennials or extremely high weed densities. If you're going to start clean, make sure to try and stay clean. Always manage and harvest your cleanest fields first. With respect to planting date, you might be able to plant and get ahead of weeds. For example, if the field that you're planting into has a lot of summer emerging weed species, choose an earlier planting date that allows your crop to get up and gives it some kind of competitive advantage against the vegetation it's going to be competing with. Using a stale seedbed technique where you stimulate the germination of weeds and then eliminate emerged seedlings both physically and chemically can be a really useful tool. But understand that not all weeds are going to respond equally well. Species with non-dormant seeds might be better controlled under this strategy as opposed to species with dormant seeds. Make sure that you have the best planting conditions that you can achieve. For instance, making sure you have a nice even seed bed so that you have good soil to seed contact for even germination, which will improve the crop's competitive ability. Make sure that you plant with appropriate densities to minimize that open space that weeds can then colonize. If you're using transplants, this can be a really useful strategy to give your crop a competitive size advantage over the weeds. Choosing varieties can have an influence on how competitive the crop is as well, based on the height and the branching traits that variety possesses. If you're going to be cultivating, make sure you keep your rows as straight as possible to maximize cultivation performance and get the weeds while they are small, either at the white thread or the early seedling stages. If you're using plastic mulch, remember that this is still going to require weeding between beds and removing weeds that emerge through the planting holes. So even though herbicides aren't available for use in hemp directly, they're likely to be used in crops that are planted before hemp. And we have to pay attention to this because these products have rotation restrictions on the label, and hemp may not be explicitly listed, but the term other crop often is, and hemp is going to fall into that other crop category. So if you're interested in understanding the type of plant-back restrictions that might be encountered in industrial hemp production, I suggest doing a Google search for the terms Wisconsin, hemp, and rotation restrictions, and you're really likely to find this nice handout that was produced by UW-Madison, which explicitly looks at the restrictions that are associated with the herbicides that are used in preceding crops. These are some of the rotation restrictions that my colleagues at UW-Madison found across multiple herbicide labels, and you can see they're extremely varied in the amount of time that you need to wait before you can plant industrial hemp. For example, for the Fusilade and Select Max labels, there was a 1-month rotation restriction. For something like Pursuit and Mazethapir, there was a 40-month rotation restriction. Now understand The list is not inclusive, and labels can and do change, and it is your responsibility to always consult the labels before making any herbicide application and before planting crops following herbicide applications. Just because we don't have herbicides currently labeled for use in hemp doesn't mean that we aren't looking to see how herbicides affect hemp. We have a lot of herbicide trials that are currently underway in the United States, and they're being undertaken for multiple reasons. The first of which is to identify active ingredients that will be safe to use in hemp and to address pest management needs in the U.S. hemp industry. The second reason is to identify herbicides that will be able to control hemp escapes that occur in following crops. And the third reason is to characterize herbicide symptomology in the case of herbicide carryover or drift injury. While there's considerable interest in conducting hemp herbicide trials, very few have actually made it to formal publication stage yet. The one exception being some work that's been recently undertaken by Michael Flessner's group at Virginia Tech University. And this is a really good paper where they evaluated herbicide tolerance of industrial hemp in both greenhouse and field conditions. So the objective of the research that was conducted in Michael Flessner's lab was to test hemp tolerance to both pre-emergence and post-emergence herbicides. And when we say pre-emergence herbicides, we're talking soil-applied herbicides. And when we're talking post-emergence, we're talking foliar-applied herbicides. They did conduct this across years, and they did do the studies in both greenhouse and in field trials. And what they saw was variability across time and between growing conditions. Although with respect to the results, they did find that S-metolachlor was the least injurious of the soil-applied herbicides in the field, although their greenhouse trials did suggest that other active ingredients may have potential for future research. With respect to the foliar-applied herbicides, quizalofop and cethoxydim, which are both grass herbicides, were found to be the least injurious of the post products, along with clopyralid and bromoxynil. I'd like you to know that we're also conducting herbicide trials here at Cornell Agritech. These are the results from a preliminary screening project that we've started to look at the safety of post-emergence or foliar-applied herbicides on industrial hemp. And you can see that our results largely agree with those that were achieved by Michael Flessner's group. Primarily, if we're looking at percent injury, the post-emergence herbicides currently in our trial providing the least amount of injury to hemp are clethodim, which is a WSSA1 herbicide, clopyramid, and bromoxynil. So we plan to continue these herbicide screens both in the greenhouse and under field conditions this fall and in 2021. The previous slide showed you our post-emergence herbicides that we're looking at. We also have a suite of pre-emergence herbicides that we'll be evaluating. And again, we'll be doing it in both the greenhouse and field conditions. We hope to have some trials describing the impacts of herbicide carryover and drift on crop growth and yield development. We're also hoping to look at the biology of hemp and evaluate its competitiveness with both current weed issues such as velvet leaf, foxtail, bindweed, and nightshade, and up-and-coming problems in New York such as Palmer amaranth and water hemp. I'd like to thank you very much for attending today's talk. If you'd like to get in touch with me to discuss weeds and weed management in hemp or in any specialty crops, feel free to contact me via email at lms438@cornell.edu, on my office phone at 315-787-2231. If you're on social media, you can find me on both Twitter and Instagram. Again, thank you so much for coming and attending my talk. I'll be present during the break if you have any questions, and have a good rest of your day.